Hello, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are tuning in from. Welcome to this week's episode on the art of teaching yoga. If this is the first time you're tuning in, my name is Wenlin. I'm a virtual yoga and meditation instructor and yoga teacher trainer based in Turin, Italy, originally from Singapore. And as part of this week's episode, during this period, this entire month will be sequencing month, and all the episodes will be relating to sequencing. And this is one topic that many of you have expressed interest in, and in the original survey, many of you mentioned that you would like to receive more guidance and more information on this area. And so really today's episode, I thought, even though this was not in the original polls, I've actually created an episode crafted around just soothing pandemic anxiety, because as yoga teachers, and also, for example, as students of yoga yourself, many of you, myself included, may be experiencing some form of anxiety or some form of stress relating to the changes unfolding around you. So this could be relating to some regulations, restrictions, the uncertainty of finding employment, or even for some of your students, how this may actually affect them. So as yoga teachers, because we teach yoga, and actually within yoga there are many different tools that we can use and resources that we can use both for ourselves and also for our students to share with them, and this can actually help to frame the entire class and how you sequence the class. So before we begin, you can feel free to drop a comment in the comment box. Let me know if you're tuning in, if you have any questions while I go through today's content. Please feel free to voice them so that I know, if anything is unclear or if you'd like me to elaborate on anything. Okay, so before we jump in, some of you may have questions with regards to this sequencing to soothe pandemic anxiety. Because, for example, I understand some of you may be teaching things like power yoga, or perhaps you're teaching a rather strong flow, or maybe a class that is attended by students who are looking for a very energetic or very strenuous or more invigorating class. So no problems. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching, for example, a Vinyasa flow class, a power or core flow class, or for example a restorative, or maybe say a yin or hatha yoga class. So today what I will talk about are more like underlying principles and some of the different exercises that you can plug and play. And I've been talking a lot about this plug and play aspect because with regards to yoga classes, instead of seeing it as an entire sequence of poses, see where there are opportunities to incorporate various elements of different things from your yoga education and from your knowledge from science, from anatomy, so that will change the experience of your students when they're doing a class. So before we dive into the various resources, I want to talk a little bit about your anatomy, about our anatomy as humans. And this may be the first time you're hearing this, but I wanted to mention this thing called the vagus nerve. So chances are you might have already heard of this. If you haven't yet, this is a very, very important part of your body. And this vagus nerve, and why I'm talking about this, even though I'm talking about sequencing, is because understanding the science and the anatomy behind it will give you a clearer understanding as to what different movements, what asanas, what practices in pranayama and other kinds of yogic practices you can use and you can sequence, so that you can use that to incorporate in your classes to soothe the kind of anxiety your students might be feeling. Right, and the vagus nerve is one of the longest nerves in the body. Right, this is often called the wandering nerve. I have some notes written here I want to share with you. So this is actually the 10th cranial nerve, and is the largest of all your cranial nerves. It starts at the base of your skull. So if you've seen images of a pictorial representation of that nerve, it starts just at the root of the skull, and it kind of like follows the root all the way, touching down, wrapping around the sides of your heart, your lungs, even your digestive tract, your abdominal organs, and this actually transmits information between your vital organs and your brain. So it's super important, this nerve, because it has a very close relationship between your nervous system and your functioning. And it kind of serves as this kind of regulator or mediator between your internal organs and your brain. And before we dive into the actual sequencing, I'll talk a little bit about the anatomy and the science behind it. So there are two main things that we'll be looking at today. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So bear with me if you've already heard about this. You can also have a think about, if you would like to share this with students, how you can explain it in a way that's easier for them to digest. So the sympathetic nervous system is that part of your body which is more reptilian. Right, it's the last part of your body that's associated with when put in a stressful situation. When, for example, you have a predator or someone who's an aggressor, or you're put in a challenging situation and you have to respond or react, it is the thing, that system that triggers your fight or flight response. Fight, flight, or freeze. All right, you choose what to do in that response. So there are many kinds of different movement modalities in general. For example, fast moving, invigorating, heart pumping kind of movement and kind of exercises actually stimulate or move your body more towards this sympathetic nervous system response. On the other side, right, you have your parasympathetic nervous system, and this is relating to your sense of rest and digest. This slows down your heart rate. This lets the rest of your body, so when your heart rate slows down, your blood is able to flow to your other organs, and then you can recuperate, your cells can regenerate. There's that sense of all the healing, right? If there's damage in the body, this is when it actually starts to repair and renew. And it may sound like, for example, one system is superior to the other, but no, actually in reality, and some articles may paint the picture, for example, saying that rest and digest is very important. Yes, in this current time and age, many of us are experiencing a lot of stress. And perhaps you, me, for example, I know in the beginning during this pandemic, I found myself often feeling very stressed and anxious because I was not sure how the situation would pan out and how that would affect my livelihood, how that would affect my safety and the safety of my family members. So you might have felt the same. Your students might have felt the same. And you might be triggered into a more sense of a stressful, you might find yourself reclining a little bit more, giving responses that are a little bit more pointed. These are all signs that you've withdrawn and are kind of into that more fight, flight, freeze response, right? Which is actually good because this is self-preservation, right? If we look back many years ago when we were primates, right, this is the response that actually helped us as humans survive as a species up till the current day. So within stressful situations, it's great to actually be able to trigger the sympathetic nervous system response. The problem is when we're not able to withdraw from the sympathetic nervous system response. So let's say, for example, you may teach a very energizing, a very stress-relieving kind of yoga that's maybe called power, or for example, power yoga or Vinyasa flow with a lot of inversions, arm balances, lots of chaturangas. Right? It's very important to incorporate some other elements and sequence other elements so that by the end of the class, your students are taken from that sympathetic nervous response into a more rest and digest parasympathetic nervous response. So that during the class, maybe you want them to expand the energy so that they can release the frustration, any tension, any anxiety that they have. But towards the end, you want to guide them so that they return to that sense of comfort, ease, restfulness, so that their body can recuperate. So that their muscles, for example, are not always in this hyper-contracted sense or state that they cannot then release. This is why it is so important to balance both of these systems, both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic by itself is also not enough because this is suitable in rest and digest. But for example, whenever a stressful situation arises, it is necessary for the body to be able to harness the other set of responses. So this is where your vagus nerve comes in. All right, and the vagus nerve, whenever you stimulate it, it has an inverse relationship with your nervous system response. So in general, people who have a good vagal tone, right, the tone of the nerve, and that good activation have a good balance between both parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system response, and they are able to adequately, given any situation, whether it's stressful or whether it's a normal one, be able to have their body regulate and work, right, and process accordingly. And this is the ideal actually kind of reaction we would like to have in our bodies to actually recuperate, to actually go about our daily functioning. So this is the context behind what I'm going to then share. So the next question would then be, probably you might be curious, then how can I begin to incorporate this knowledge, for this vagus nerve? So just now I mentioned it runs from the back of your head down all the way through your heart and even touches down in towards the area close towards actually where your diaphragm is. So this is a very, very interesting information, right? It comes down through your throat, around the chest area, and it even reaches the diaphragm. So the first thing you can already do, right, as a yoga teacher is to incorporate the breath in your classes. So understand there may be some pushbacks. I know that, many of you may say, but I don't have time in my 60-minute class. People are coming here for a workout, or they are really expecting something more energetic. I don't have time to teach but diaphragmatic breathing. I don't have time to dedicate an entire 5 minutes or even 10 minutes to teaching breathing. That's totally fine. But maybe you can set aside at least 2 to 3 minutes towards the beginning of the class to teach your students, even if they already know, to emphasize the importance of the breath. Because as the class gets more and more strenuous, right, the breath is an anchor that they can always return to. So if you already teach regulars and they are familiar with this, during the class, continue to remind them to breathe deeply and get them to breathe all the way down to the pit, right, the deepest pit of their diaphragm. So many modern many of us who live modern lives, work stressful jobs, right? A lot of my clients, they have very shallow breathing, and the breath is mostly kept here and most a little bit more deeper towards the breast area. So in order to stimulate the vagus nerve, the most effective way is to breathe down all the way, imagining towards the pit of the lungs. And sometimes a way to do it is to get your clients or your students to visualize 3-part breathing, and you can explain to them that anatomically it's not possible because the belly is separate from your lungs, right? And in between separates, the diaphragm is what separates your thoracic cavity and your digestive cavity. But then you can go ahead and then explain to them that what happens is when you inhale and breathe in all the way to the bottom of your stomach, visualizing that what really happens is you're breathing in all the way to the bottom of your lungs, which very few of us do, right? And that when that happens, your lungs expand, the diaphragm, which is usually doming, pushes down against your stomach, and that's why your stomach bulges out. So all this then makes sense, and many of your clients, even if they're looking for a workout, if you start that way and you tell them the benefit, you explain to them the benefit of what you are doing, they start to be able to understand. We all have to start to educate our clients in one way or another. And if you're teaching, say, a restorative, a yin, a slower pace class, definitely if you're not already doing this, please do this. You can incorporate things like 3-part breathing, getting your clients to visualize breathing all the way towards your stomach, then your chest, then the top part of the chest, or getting them to visualize as if pouring a flask of water in towards a cup, and you want to get them to fill all the way from the bottom of the cup, the middle of the cup, towards the top of the cup, and the same way as they exhale. So that's one technique. Another way of incorporating breath in your classes is to use Ujjayi breathing. Right, in Ujjayi breathing, ocean breath, this is actually really great because it activates the back of your throat, and your vagus nerve also actually follows that same path. So when you're doing Ujjayi breathing, you are stimulating your vagus nerve. Your clients are stimulating their vagus nerve. So cue Ujjayi breathing if you don't already, even if your regulars know that. Right, just remind them from time to time to come back to the breath, because sometimes really we do forget, they do forget, right? You forget, I forget as well. This breath, it's very, very important. It's one of the most the simplest ways to do it. The next thing I wanted to talk about is another thing that might be helpful is called Brahmari breathing, and you might be already familiar with this. This is the bee breath or the humming breath. If you teach kids yoga, this is a very useful tool, and whenever I teach kids yoga, not very often, the kids love it so much because it is imagining as if you are a bee and humming with your nose. And when you do that, you also stimulate your vocal cords, you stimulate the entire chest area here, and this activates and stimulates, helps to improve the tone of your vagus nerve. So that is really great one. And if you're not familiar, it looks a little bit like this. You can get your clients to place their fingers on the area of the nose where the nose bridge is, and then get them to exhale, half inhale, and on the next exhale to hum. And to connect with the vibrations. Right? Even if you don't do that at the beginning of the class, try to set aside some time to do that towards your cool down or towards your restoration when you come back towards the ground before Shavasana. That's super important because this is what sets the tone for them to transition from the parasympathetic nervous system towards the sympathetic nervous system response, so that after the class, after working out all their frustrations from work, from home, they can really, relax and completely learn how to relax and transition to that state of accepting that they can truly relax. That is very, very important, and that's the role of us as yoga teachers. There's some other things I want to talk about, but I'm just going to have a quick look to see if anyone has any questions. Okay, I think seems alright for now, but if you do, please keep your questions coming. Alright, the next one I want to talk about is, of course, then you might be curious as to how you can then sequence various poses or asanas, because I know for many of you, your main interest is you're really curious about how to then incorporate various poses, and for your class it's very asana focused, or your clients are mainly interested in asana. They didn't pay for the class to come and attend, breathing class. Okay, some of the clients are indeed like this. So if you're dealing with clients like this, what are some of the asanas that you can use to actually begin to stimulate the vagus nerve or improve the vagal tone? Some things that you can do are inversions. So inversions, right, naturally the thing that comes to mind for most of you might be, you would think of things like headstand, handstand, right? But actually there are many different inversions. And I'd like to invite you to rethink the definition of inversion. An inversion is any pose in which the head is below the heart. Right? So an inversion could be as simple as standing straight, getting your clients to inhale, float their arms up towards the sky, exhale, gently come down towards the earth, and then to grab their elbows in ragdoll position and then soften their head, let their head shake from left to right, left to right. And the head is below the heart in that position in ragdoll. And that is an inversion. In fact, in any normal flow class, let's say with a Vinyasa flow, it is full of inversions because downward facing dog is an inversion, right? An inverted triangle in which your head is below your heart. So these are all very accessible inversions that even beginners can do. So even for downward facing dog, if it's very hard for your clients, you can get them to soften their knees. They don't have to come directly into that triangle. You can get them to do variations with blocks underneath the arches of their feet. Don't get them to not focus so much on the shape, but rather the sensation of the pose. And I want to talk a little bit about these inversions because this aspect of the benefit of the inversions is that when you come into an inversion, it reverses the flow of the blood. Usually when you're standing, most of us, we stand and spend a lot of our time like this in an upright position. So the heart is here and the brain is here, and it is actually a little bit more difficult for the heart to pump blood towards the brain. And it is along with gravity that the heart, the blood flow of the heart moves downwards. So in an inversion, what happens is it reverses that. And also your lymph nodes and your lymphatic system, right? It's all around this area. So what happens when you invert yourself, when you turn things upside down, is it flushes out and clears out the toxins, and it reverses the flow so that it gives you an opportunity to then change the flow within your system, and this is why it is so beneficial. I want to talk about another inversion that probably you might not already be doing, especially if you teach a Vinyasa or strong class. And this is legs up the wall or Viparita Karani. This is very, very valuable in most of the restorative classes, in many yin classes. Also, it is often a staple, and the benefits of this pose are really amazing. So this is also a great alternative if, for example, you have the habit of teaching shoulder stand, but some of the clients in your class or some students in your class, for some reason, shoulder stand is not accessible to them, right? So that L shape in which your body is lying on the ground and your legs up against the wall, or if you don't have a wall, you can get them to just softly bend their knees and then lengthen the legs up towards the sky. So that would be a possible variation, and to make it an inversion, you can get them to place a block underneath the sacrum, so that would elevate the sacrum just a tiny bit so that the heart is above the head, and then it becomes an inversion. So this is a very simple and accessible way, and again, you can sequence this towards the end of the class, right before maybe a few poses before Shavasana as you are coming towards the ground, maybe after Paschimottanasana. This would be a very nice one to do. Or for example, in the beginning, if you want to incorporate an inversion that is also energizing, you can consider things like rolling bridges. So if you're new to rolling bridges, get your client, for example, to lie on their backs, feet planted on the ground, knees bent. And then from here, get them to gently and slowly lift the pelvis up and exhale, gently come down. So into a series of bridges, and not a clenching, very forceful one, but because you're starting to move and mobilize the spine, get them to do it very slowly, and you can add also the arms, getting them to float so that the arms come straight by the sides of the ears, and then the pelvis floats up, and then to exhale, and together the arms and the pelvis come all the way down. So I often teach this as an introduction or the beginning towards the class, and this is a very nice way to get people to start to energize, but also it's a very relaxing and not overly strenuous way to introduce them towards movement, towards the beginning of that class, right? So these are some of the tips. I also wanted to talk a little bit about not just these poses, but in general, some other things that you can consider with regards to the breath. So another thing about sequencing is if you don't already teach the breath, specific breath methods, one thing you can do with changing the nature or the energy within your classes is very simply to change the proportion or the length of your inhale, retention, your exhale, and holding on exhale. So these, right, will actually change the nature and the effect of how your clients or how your students feel the energy within each of the poses. And I will elaborate a little bit more about this. Perhaps this will actually, there's enough content to probably even take up a full episode. But so let's look at this. So there are 4 parts to your breath. Right, and before I end this episode, I would just want to talk quickly about this. So there are 4 parts to your breath. Inhale, holding on inhale, or the pause after your inhale, the exhale, and the pause after your exhale. So they're all very different. So when you inhale, obviously you're taking in breath in towards your body. When you hold the breath, your lungs are full and the lungs have already expanded, so they are at maybe their maximum or a little bit larger capacity. When you exhale, there's this movement of the lungs becoming smaller and contracting. And then on exhale, on empty, right, you're holding that, or there's a slight pause. So each of this have a slightly different nature. And before I end off, I just want to share with you an exercise, if you're not already doing that, is called Samavriti. And this is also one that helps to regulate and tone your vagus nerve. This is a really good one to help to transition from fight or flight towards rest and digest. It is often called box breathing because you draw a box or square breathing with your breath. And it's called samavriti because it means equal fluctuation. So each inhale, each pause, each exhale, and each holding or suspension on that exhale is the same. And you could begin, for example, at the beginning of the class by setting that as the tone of the class, or you just get your students to notice the inhale, pause, exhale, and pause, and then cue them into ujjayi breathing. And towards the end of the class, before moving towards restoration and coming down towards the earth, you get them to cue them in towards samavriti, because this is a really nice breath to relax, to restore. And it looks a little bit like this, and I'll show you the breath. So you begin with one normal exhale, soft and gentle inhale, normal exhale. And you let your clients know that the next inhale, you start and you count. Usually a good one would be to start with the count of 4. So you hold the breath, inhale for 4, hold the breath for 4, exhale for 4, and hold, suspending the breath for 4. So it could be something like inhaling for the count of 4, 3, 2, 1, hold, 4, 3, 2, 1, exhale 4, 3, 2, 1, suspend for 4, 3, 2, and 1, so on and so forth. So you get them to continue, and you can always cue them to follow your counting first, and then let them know that towards maybe the 3rd set, the 4th or the 5th set, that they can count their own breathing, because for some clients 4 counts might be a little bit difficult. They might only be able to manage 3, or for example, for some clients they might be able to do 6 counts. So with the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the different energetic effects. And before I talk about this, if any of you have clients who are pregnant and you are doing samavriti, note that for pregnant clients or your students, right, retention of the breath can be a little bit difficult, and it's not so beneficial for them. It can be quite a struggle. So it's better for pregnant clients to adapt the practice, and instead, for my own pregnant clients, I do this thing called rectangle breathing. So you inhale for 4, you hold the breath for 2 counts instead, you exhale for 4, and then you suspend the breath for 2 counts. So this is just one thing to note. And if any of your other clients, for example, they have some difficulty with their lung capacity, maybe their lungs are compromised, or maybe they're struggling, they have some other comorbidities like maybe they have asthma, or maybe they have COPD, then try it with the rectangle breathing first. Right? Or simply just get them to notice that there is a pause between your inhale and exhale, and the exhale and the next inhale. That is already a breakthrough in itself. And the longer as they begin to practice, the better they will be at beginning to cultivate that pause, beginning to lengthen their exhale. So with the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the energetic differences between the breath and how that may influence how you teach yoga. So many of you have done your yoga teacher training in which you learned every single pranayama practice. Maybe you're familiar with Brahmari breathing, about ujjayi breathing. You learned Kapalabhati breathing, which is skull shining breath. Maybe you learned the breath of fire, right? Which is the pumping breath. So you might know all of these breathing techniques separately, and you might know that this technique goes specifically for this kind of classes, or I do this at the beginning of the class and this one at the end of the class. But a very important question would be to ask, what is the energetic effect of this kind of breath, and why is that the case? So I'll use one quick example and talk about this before we end off the episode. And if there's more interest, I will talk about this in another episode separately, just on the breath, because we could be just talking about the breath itself for 30 minutes, for 2 hours, one whole workshop on the breath, because many of us don't breathe well enough. All right. The inhale and how you hold the inhale, right, affects the energy and the increase of energy, the invigorating sense of your body, of bringing that into the body. And that's usually associated with the parasympathetic nervous system, and it triggers the parasympathetic fight, flight, or freeze. The exhale and the pause after the exhale, right, actually stimulates your rest and digest, so your sympathetic nervous system. So now that you have that in mind, you can actually stagger or change the length of your inhale, the pause, the exhale, and the pause to achieve different effects. And I'll give one last example. So for example, if we look at Kapalabhati breathing, right, which is skull shining breath, so it focuses on the exhale and the inhale comes naturally, but it is very short. So you exhale, 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 so that the inhale comes rapidly and quickly, and you take in a lot of breath. So what happens is that hyper-oxygenates your body, and naturally you will feel this invigoration after the exercise, maybe even a little bit of lightheadedness, right, from that hyperventilation, because you've taken in so much oxygen. Right, on the flip side, if you've attended a restorative class, or if you teach a restorative class or have been to a restorative yoga training, you probably know that a lot of restorative classes focus on exhaling, and for example, even exhaling through your mouth, like inhale through the nose, exhale through your mouth, and get people to really soften and release. So there are actually different energetic effects, and something as simple as changing the length of your breath and incorporating very intentionally different kinds of pranayama practices, or different lengths of your inhale versus the pause versus the exhale at the beginning of your class versus the end of the class, and throughout your entire class, cueing and reminding your clients, your students, to actually breathe, and breathe in a certain way will affect how they feel during the class. And if we're going back to today's theme, right, to soothe the pandemic anxiety, the one tip I would have, again, to remind you, right, would be to incorporate pranayama. You can try to incorporate things like Brahmari breathing, reminding clients to do Ujjayi breathing. You can incorporate Samavriti, box breathing, towards the end of the class or in the beginning. If you have some time, set that aside to get people to notice the inhale, pause, exhale, and pause. And some other things, intentionally sequence poses that will bring your client towards a certain rest and digest, more towards a more restorative kind of pose. So even after maybe say a very energizing beginning of the class, middle of the class, incorporate some gentle inversions that will help them begin to flush out, all right, the lymphatic system, so they can come and reach that restorative, that very calming, soothing sense of response, so that all their anxiety can begin to melt away. And I think this is truly the benefit of yoga. There are some clients who may come to you for things like maybe losing weight, or maybe they want to build strength, and that's great. That's all the benefits of yoga. But part and parcel of teaching yoga is also giving clients what they need without them asking for it. So maybe they came to you because they asked for a strenuous or energizing class, or because they really had so much stress and really wanted to let loose from work, from home. Give them all they are saying they want, but also give them what they need, right? For most of us, I would say maybe 90% or even more of us are feeling the same. This sense of anxiety, uncertainty is the same. So all of us, I think, in my opinion, could benefit from these tools and resources that I've shared earlier. So I hope that this episode has been useful for you, and that you will take home some of these tools and really begin to incorporate them in your classes. Because in my opinion, I've attended and watched many classes, and I know as teachers it's very hard. You have to make a living and all that, but at the same time, right, I think the true value in teaching yoga is to be able to help your clients, your students, have that sense of okay. So for a second, the video was frozen, so I wasn't sure if you guys were still tuning in and if the video was working. Thankfully, it seems fine, right? So for the last bit, just wanted to again reiterate the importance that us as teachers, our role in terms of being able to calm and soothe and to take care of our clients, because only when you actually assure your clients, you actually solve the real needs of the clients, then they have more energy and you can teach them other things like advanced arm balances, or for example inversions like headstand, handstand, right? These all come after your client's basic needs. Their feelings are more settled. All right, so please take care. I hope you have a great week ahead. I'll be sharing more resources on this week's episode. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a message. You can reply in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And if there's anything else that you would like to see more of, for example, in the episodes, there's a certain part of teaching yoga that you're struggling with, please let me know. I would be very glad to share more resources to help you address that. So take care and see you soon.